Parkland Hospital, there has been a shooting. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
That's an unconfirmed report that the president was hit in the head. The president's wife, Jackie Kennedy, was not hurt. She walked into the hospital at her husband's stretcher side.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, the world stood still. People all over the country wept at the thought that they would never see him again. Questions flooded in, and history was changed forever. But what if the president left behind one final chilling message? Not in a speech, not in a letter, but in a phone call. A conversation so rare, so devastating, that it will leave you speechless. Join us as we uncover the shocking details that changes everything. In the final days of his life, John F. Kennedy seemed like a man at the height of his power, but also carrying a weight he couldn't shake. The president had just returned from diplomatic travels, and on the surface, everything looked polished. Smiles for the cameras, laughter with staff, carefully crafted speeches. But behind closed doors, insiders noted a subtle shift. JFK had been more reflective than usual, often slipping into quiet moments mid-conversation. Some said he seemed distracted, others called it something closer to unease. He spoke of enemies in vague terms, and once joked that, if someone really wanted to get me, it wouldn't be that hard. That line, tossed out in passing, would feel far more chilling in hindsight. In those last few days, Kennedy had planned a major campaign push across the South, with Texas marked as a key stop. His team was aware of the political hostility brewing in Dallas, but JFK brushed off the warnings. "We can't be afraid of a few hotheads," he reportedly said, but not everyone around him was so calm. And as the trip drew closer, an invisible clock was already ticking. Hours before his motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza, President Kennedy spoke to his longtime friend Kenny O'Donnell, a trusted inner-circle figure who often acted as a buffer between JFK and the chaos of Washington. According to O'Donnell, the president's voice was calm, even upbeat, but there was an edge to his words. He made a joking reference to the hostility in Dallas, calling it "nut country," and mentioned that he expected a rough crowd. But it wasn't just political jabs. He also made a comment that stuck with O'Donnell for decades. JFK allegedly said, "If somebody wants to get you, you're gonna get it, so why worry?" That call would be the last time JFK spoke freely, unfiltered, before stepping into a car that would carry him straight into history. And whether he meant those words as a joke or a warning, no one would ever truly know. By late 1963, it was becoming clear that John F. Kennedy's presidency wasn't just about image anymore. He had already won over the American public with his charm and polished confidence. But behind the carefully constructed facade was a leader who had started to shed the restraints of politics as usual. At the core of his evolving mission was a desire for peace. After the near-apocalyptic standoff of the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK had emerged shaken. From that moment on, his speeches took on a more philosophical tone, emphasizing cooperation over domination. He proposed a nuclear test ban treaty, opened back-channel talks with Cuba, and made clear he didn't want to escalate in Vietnam. All of these moves made him deeply unpopular with those who believed in hard power and secrecy over diplomacy and transparency. Kennedy also began to question the power of the intelligence community. The Bay of Pigs disaster had been a turning point. After being misled by intelligence officials, he vowed never to be cornered by them again. He took steps to limit their reach, cut off funding for covert missions, and even told close aides he wanted to shatter the agency into pieces. It was a warning shot, and the people in those agencies knew it. At home, JFK took on entrenched interests that had long operated in the shadows. He challenged the military-industrial complex, infuriated oil barons with tax reform proposals, and started reshaping the Federal Reserve's role in the economy. He pushed civil rights legislation despite fierce resistance from Southern lawmakers, and walked a political tightrope that grew more dangerous by the day. Some of his own advisors feared he was moving too fast, too independently, and making too many enemies at once. Kennedy wasn't blind to the risks. He once told a friend, "There's a lot of people in this town who'd rather see me gone." He was aware that his decisions were ruffling feathers, not just in politics, but in power structures that didn't answer to voters. Still, he pushed forward. It was no longer about legacy, it was about something deeper. Kennedy wanted to leave behind a version of America that wasn't controlled by fear, secrecy, or silence, and that made him a threat, not just to political opponents, but to institutions built on the very foundations he was trying to dismantle. As he flew to Texas, few realized the full scope of the war he was quietly waging, and fewer still would ever know just how close he came to changing everything. November 22, 1963, just past noon, under a bright Texas sky, everything changed in less than 10 seconds. As the motorcade turned onto Elm Street in Dealey Plaza, cheers filled the air. JFK, seated beside Jackie, was smiling, waving, completely exposed. Then came the sound that would echo through history. First, a sharp crack, confusion, a second shot, then a third. Jackie's face twisted in horror. Secret Service agents lunged too late, and the president slumped over, his life ending in front of a stunned nation. Within minutes, chaos swallowed the streets. People screamed, some dropped to the ground, others just froze, unable to grasp what had happened. In the hours that followed, the world learned of Kennedy's death, but the questions started even faster. Who really pulled the trigger? Why was security so thin that day? And why did so many witnesses describe hearing shots from multiple directions? The official story pinned it all on one man, Lee Harvey Oswald. But from the very beginning, there were cracks in that narrative, and what made it worse was what came next: silence, secrecy, and a trail that would only grow colder over time. From the moment the gunfire stopped, whispers of the CIA's involvement began to surface, and they've never really gone away. While the Warren Commission quickly dismissed the idea of a wider conspiracy, internal documents tell a murkier story. Kennedy had already clashed with the agency after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, blaming the CIA for misleading him and vowing to strip it down. In the months that followed, he reportedly grew even more distrustful, refusing to greenlight several covert operations and quietly planning reforms that would limit the agency's reach. Former operatives later claimed that JFK had become a liability, someone who couldn't be controlled. And as more files have been declassified, odd connections started surfacing. Several people linked to Oswald had prior ties to intelligence agencies. Some of the CIA's own records on Oswald conveniently went missing. And perhaps most suspicious of all, high-level officials kept stonewalling investigators, even decades later. Was it just bureaucracy, or was something being protected? The deeper you dig, the more the official version starts to feel like a cover story.
They said it was a conspiracy. Warren Commission said Oswald acted alone. You have two government official records saying the exact opposite, but they were both compromised because they were CIA agents in charge of the gatekeeper of information.
Parkland Hospital, there has been...
And if the CIA truly had nothing to hide, why has so much been hidden? In the wake of Kennedy's death, one man stepped into the power vacuum almost instantly: Lyndon B. Johnson. Sworn in aboard Air Force One just hours after the assassination, LBJ's rise was swift, solemn, and shadowed by suspicion. Officially, he was JFK's loyal vice president, but behind the scenes, their relationship had grown increasingly strained. Johnson was a master political operator, ruthless when necessary, always calculating, and some believed he had more to gain from Kennedy's death than anyone else. In the months leading up to Dallas, there were already quiet rumors that JFK was planning to replace LBJ on the ticket for the 1964 election. Scandals surrounding Johnson's allies, including investigations into corruption and backroom deals, had begun to surface. Kennedy insiders reportedly saw him as a liability. LBJ knew it too, and those closest to him later described a man who felt cornered, desperate to hold on to power at any cost. After the assassination, Johnson quickly reversed several of Kennedy's positions. Troop levels in Vietnam skyrocketed under his leadership. CIA operations that JFK had tried to rein in were suddenly back in motion. And perhaps most telling, he fought hard to control the direction of the Warren Commission, even helping to choose who would sit on it. Some insiders have even claimed Johnson was warned in advance that something big was about to happen, though no proof ever surfaced. None of this is concrete evidence, but when you line up the timing, the motive, and the aftermath, it's hard not to wonder. Was Johnson simply the man fate placed next in line, or was he always waiting for his moment? While the official story focused on a lone shooter, another theory kept rising to the surface, one that pointed to organized crime and a deadly betrayal at the highest level. During Kennedy's campaign for the presidency, there were quiet murmurs of behind-the-scenes help from underworld figures. Some believed that certain favors were exchanged, favors that came with strings. The idea was simple: help Kennedy win, and once he was in office, the pressure would ease off. But instead of protection, what came next felt like a betrayal. Once in the White House, the Kennedy administration launched one of the most aggressive crackdowns on organized crime in U.S. history. Headlines blared with arrests, indictments, and televised hearings. Powerful figures who once operated in the shadows were dragged into the light. And behind closed doors, fury was boiling. To them, the Kennedys had turned their backs on a deal, publicly biting the hand that had helped feed their rise. Some would later claim this betrayal sparked talks of revenge. Chilling accounts emerged from inside prison walls, where certain inmates confessed to conversations about silencing the president, claiming that removing him was the only way to stop the pressure. The idea wasn't to send a message, It was to end the war by taking out the one man they believed was calling the shots. While the official investigation was quick to present a lone gunman, countless people never fully bought into that version of events. One of the most persistent theories that's haunted the case for decades is the possibility that organized crime played a role in President Kennedy's assassination. And the deeper you dig, the harder it becomes to ignore. Before Kennedy ever reached the White House, there were whispers that certain backroom deals had helped smooth the path. During the tight 1960 election, crucial votes in key states seemed to swing unexpectedly in his favor, particularly in cities where influence behind the scenes had long been controlled by people with power far outside the realm of politics. Those deals were never public, and no one ever confirmed them on record. But in the shadowy overlap between politics and crime, silence often speaks the loudest. What's undeniable is how quickly the relationship soured. Once elected, the Kennedy administration launched an all-out war on organized crime. Under the leadership of his brother, the Attorney General, hundreds of cases were opened, surveillance operations increased, high-ranking underworld figures were subpoenaed, questioned, and sometimes publicly humiliated. It was a stark reversal from what many expected, and it didn't sit well with people who felt they had delivered favors expecting protection in return. Some believed that betrayal set the stage for revenge. Behind closed doors, conversations reportedly turned darker. There were whispers that the only way to stop the pressure was to remove the source, and not just the Attorney General, but the president himself. The reasoning was chillingly pragmatic. Take out the man at the top, and the crusade against them might collapse. Years later, buried FBI memos and off-the-record testimonies began to surface. In prison cells and under immunity deals, certain individuals claimed to have heard confessions, threats, or detailed outlines of a plan. One account described a strategy that involved manipulating the perfect fall guy, someone with a suspicious background and enough ties to global politics to distract from the truth. Sound familiar? What makes this theory so compelling isn't just the motive, it's the silence. Witnesses disappeared, files went missing, leads were ignored, and over time, efforts to reopen the case were met with firm resistance. Why would so many doors be closed so quickly if there was nothing to hide? To this day, organized crime is listed among the possible players in congressional reports about the assassination. No hard evidence was ever presented in court. No one was ever charged. But if revenge really was the motive, it wouldn't have left a trail. It wouldn't have needed to. It would have been clean, quiet, and final. Because in that world, loyalty is currency, and betrayal has consequences. In the final hours of his life, John F. Kennedy moved through Dallas with the same composure and charm that had defined his presidency. To the outside world, nothing seemed out of place. He waved to the crowds, exchanged jokes with staff, and held Jackie's hand as the motorcade rolled past cheering faces. But beneath the surface, there was a current of something heavier, something quieter, and according to those closest to him, something deeply personal. That morning, JFK had spoken with aides, supporters, and his wife. He smiled. He laughed. But several people noted that he also seemed distant, like his thoughts were half a step ahead of the moment. He wasn't nervous exactly, but reflective. A longtime aide would later say that Kennedy had been speaking a lot about legacy in those final days. Not the kind you put in history books, but the kind you carry in silence. He once said, "It's not what you do when they're watching. It's what you do when no one ever sees it." Those words now echo with more weight than anyone realized at the time. His final private words, shared only with Jackie, were soft and intimate. He told her how beautiful she looked, something she would later remember through tears. Moments later, as the car turned down Elm Street, he was struck down, gone in an instant. The chaos that followed is etched into the national memory. But what was lost in that moment was more than just a man. It was a vision, a course correction, a leader who many believe was just beginning to show the world who he really was. In the days that followed, theories exploded. The mystery of the final phone call, the odd warnings that came just before the shooting, the missing tapes and redacted documents, they all fed into a single truth. There was more to the story than the public was told. And in the middle of it all was a man who may have sensed what was coming, but chose to keep walking forward anyway. He didn't panic. He just lived every second of that day with intention. And maybe that's the part we missed. The final call, the warnings, the shifting glances, they all paint a picture of a man walking into something far bigger than he let on. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He waved to the crowd and took his place in history. So much of JFK's presidency was about hope, about possibility, but his final message might have been something different, a quiet warning. That truth can be dangerous, that challenging the system comes at a price, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is refuse to be afraid. But the truth he carried with him, that might have been the real reason he never made it out of Dallas. Do you believe JFK's final phone call hinted at something deeper? Was his death the result of a lone madman, or something far more calculated? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for further updates.